Good morning. What both Illya and Lance were too humble to mention is that the report that many of you contributed to, that is on the table outside, received the AIA Honor Award just recently. And it's enough to encourage all of the good group here gathered. How many, I'm sure everyone, have had the experience described as suddenly nothing was ever the same? So maybe that moment was yours early in life, maybe with 9/11, maybe with any one of the storms that have hit the season. But that was the statement of Emily Testa, who owns one of these houses in Seaside Village. It's one of the little examples of the tough questions that we, as architects, planners, advisors, are asked to advise. Had Hurricane Sandy came up to the bottom of the first floor, in other words, whatever was in the basement, which is considerable, was lost and now in the street, as you see. The question that all of us actually will be faced with, it's shown with that little arrow, which I'm going to call the gap. Is it the gap of knowledge? Yes, we're not quite sure whether Sandy is the top, and in fact, the advice is it was only the beginning, and just where do we put that flood line? That actually, each of our professionals will be part of our discussion this afternoon. There's no clear answer. It will be higher in future. When in the future, to what extent in the future, and what of the moves? If, in fact, we were confident that Hurricane Sandy was the top, this set of conditions is not that difficult to design for. If, in fact, as some advise, it's going to be 6 feet higher, then we have some tough decisions. How many here are from Connecticut? Very few, so I can speak freely. How many here would describe your personality and your essentially stake in life as a first responder? I hope some of you actually have some confidence of how you react under emergency. What first responders are trained, and it takes practice, and practice and practices. When that moment hits, suddenly nothing was ever the same. 3 words: make a plan. It's not what I say this morning, it's what you leave this day with that's interesting to me. I think each of us can make a plan. And whatever I have to say, I hope is helpful to that. I have a handout which is on the front desk. I'm going to go through a number of slides that have all of the words, that have all of the citations. So as I flip through these to catch up with time, no need to take notes. I'm just going to hit some highlight points. I'm reporting on Connecticut, and I think the message I want to convey is, while Sandy only touched us in Connecticut very lightly, if you look at each of the statistics, it's essentially 1 to 10. Number of outages, cost of damage, number of deaths. It was essentially we were lightly touched, but had the tides been different, it would have hit Connecticut. This meeting would have been in Connecticut rather than in New York. And the lessons that I can convey is Connecticut had a number of plans in motion well before these storms. The Nature Conservancy, Save the Sound, other nonprofits had community dialogues already initiated, and you'll see in the references, those of you who are planners and architects wanting to see what was done, you'll find some good reports of communities that already have plans in place and actually being funded through bonding, not unlike some New York and New Jersey communities, but there's some good examples there. And then when we were hit, as we all were, by a series of both near misses and hits, in the northeaster of April 10, that went up to Rhode Island with 2 feet of flooding in Warwick, Rhode Island Mall, never experienced before. And Irene just went to the left, devastated the Hudson Valley and Vermont, as you know. And in fact, shortly thereafter, we were hit in Connecticut with Nemo, in which there were deaths caused by inability to access hospitals. There was 4 feet of snow, and essentially the routes were jammed. This citation in the reference documents some of the facts on the ground. I don't want to dwell on them except by reference to say that Sandy was just an early pass. Had the tides been different, had the temperature of the water been different, had sea level been higher, it would have been even more devastating than what we've experienced. So there you are, and there's the gap. We have new guidance after Sandy, and not to go through these, but to just point out, whatever we practiced as flood professionals before Sandy is now changed, but we have wonderful sources of knowledge and new knowledge, beginning with your good efforts, and ending on the far right with a report out of Secretary Donovan's office that Hank, now on his way out, was the author of. And for those of you who are in both academic or professional practice, you need to see this stuff, and particularly in the middle, the Hurricane Sandy flood advisories. Those need to be on your desktop as professionals. Those are your guidelines to practice. Some of the big headlines are as written, and this may come into bear in the discussions this afternoon, but elevating to BFE, which everyone actually is doing at this point, for the most part, does not provide complete protection against flooding. That's in the FEMA publications, all sorts of reasons. The BFE is based on historical data, and in fact, there's errors that could be made based on any local conditions. And we as professionals are left at the end of the gangplank saying to our client, how far above BFE is reasonable due diligence safety factor. And interesting, in the last week, this publication came online, the President's announcement of the Climate Data Initiative. And even in this morning's headline, there was a new report from the UN. So what's interesting is those of us who are researchers or scholars or diligent readers of the text, we're pretty active. And the state of art is changing. And just how we respond to that is the measure of the quality that we bring to the discussion. Here's the plan. Everyone here in the room is probably not a first responder, but I would hope an advanced responder. You know how to make a plan. That talent, the ability to convene a discussion about a planning, is your gift and our obligation to our community. If we know how to do that, and if we don't, we're going to learn how. That's the message I have to convey, very much conveyed with what Hank called the sabbatical. Now this, which is in your handout, so don't need to take notes, this is the game architects play. Somewhere along this curve is your practice and your capability. Are you an innovator, a maverick? Is your office kind of the first one up with ideas? Or do you wait around and are you a good early adopter? Or in fact, do you have such a practice at a scale that you have to confidently accept only what's been proved in practice, which actually represents the majority of practice? Each one of these steps is a ladder to accelerating new ideas in the marketplace. Once you sort this out, you'll find your place where, in fact, as a group or as an individual practitioners or as groups within our community, we can accelerate innovation and introduce new practices. And I point out just 3 on the left. This is where we'll be after a year or so. This is where we will need to be in order to help our communities. Community design centers, reaching out and engaging communities, test bedding ideas to scale, and an idea that I've picked up from the Amsterdam Holland plans, worthy of note if you wish to look at best practices. living laboratory programs. And you'll see those coming out of the Design by Rebuild proposals, I'm sure. So if we must, we start here. What I don't show on the left is the group of municipal officials up on the stage, and by the end of the meeting, cowering under the force of anger that came from what should have been a civil dialogue. And we need to get here. On the upper left, the ability to visualize both risks and opportunities at the regional scale. On the lower right, to work collaboratively with folks with different knowledge sets, talents, and disciplines. And finally, one-on-one, the conversations we have with colleagues, helping them along the way with their own plan of action. Just to show some finals of how in Bridgeport we are convening a community dialogue, which I call Community Planning for Resilience, or CPR. And when you convene that dialogue, disaster is not the word. That makes us scared, frightened, tighten up, uncertain. You bring together a community based on economic opportunity, economic development, environmental justice and health, and also natural disaster preparedness. And these, in fact, from this core of issues, you draw out your main headlines. And to reduce this to practice, where folks who are not used to this can engage in the process, we developed this ADEPT checklist. And this is essentially the process we take a community through in discussion. You're familiar with most of this, but I want to emphasize, given that we are architects in the room, the importance of the pledge we take when we became licensed professionals to protect public health and safety. That actually is the portal by which we can enter rightfully into discussion to argue for the best possible best practices on behalf of public health, safety, and welfare. And finally, and you might do this afternoon, find out in your community, we could do this on this campus, what's the weakest link? What could go wrong? And actually finding that in any campus or any building or any community tells you, identifies the spots to which to attend. And we're doing that in the Bridgeport region with a 6-community discussion. There's things that work well here and there's things that don't. We haven't yet ironed it out. It's just a model process. But the argument for coming to the table is, it's not about me, it's not about my particular needs, it's about our shared needs and what I can do to help my colleagues at the table. And with that, I give you the best definition of resilience, which actually is the ability to use the brain to be creative and innovative and smart.